extended invitations to people at the Department of Public Health and Social Services. I don't know if we have representatives from those organizations that have joined. Maybe you could introduce.
It looks like Barbara Cass is on from DPH.
Barbara?
She's trying to connect.
Okay, yeah, she's trying to connect. So Barbara's DPH and no one from DSS.
Yes, Jennifer
Oh,
Caballero.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jennifer.
Jen is on.
Hi, Jennifer. All right, there.
Hi.
Good.
How are you?
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, all right, hopefully everyone received the materials that were Cameron distributed yesterday. So I guess the goal, the purpose of what was distributed, first we had taken some time amongst the chairman and Cameron to try to jot down some subject matter that were things that we had heard, either things that we knew about from the bill or were provided in some of the testimony, were provided through DPH or DCP's presentations. And so I think what we're trying to do today is get our arms around kind of the population of topics that we're going to explore further, and whether we make recommendations on them or not. I mean, that's not really the point today. The point today is to, first of all, comply with what we're supposed to do with the act and look at each of the items identified there, and then secondly, to come up with, to make sure we're addressing anything else that was raised. And so that was really the purpose of the 4-page memo we sent. And so maybe the easiest thing to do is to just, go through the memo and talk about the items that are identified and see if people agree with them, disagree, have, further things to add, so that we can make sure we're addressing everything we need to at this point. And so the first topic is confusion about Connecticut's home care industry, which
Would it help, Mark, if you just shared the screen and put it up so we can go through it that way?
Yeah, Cameron,
we all have it, yes, but.
Cameron, do you have it with you?
Yes, I do. I'll pull it up to screen share.
Thank you.
Here. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you, Cameron.
So, I don't know, the confusion about the home care industry was identified as a specific bullet in the act, but it kind of weaves its way through a lot of the different bullets. And I'll just give a quick overview of what I think this covers based on my experiences. But, I think, as we all know, depending on where we come from or come at it in this industry, oftentimes, and I will say most times, when people come to look at home care or become involved with home care, it's frequently, in a crisis, right? Some things happen to a loved one, and that loved one is either in a facility or, the family's made a determination that they can't be left alone. And so the family is frantically trying to understand, not only keep that person safe in the immediate situation, but now they're tasked with trying to understand all the different, agencies and types of organizations that are available to them. And some they find out about if they're in a facility through their insurance or Medicare or Medicaid benefits, and then oftentimes they don't find out about our industry because it tends to be private pay and it tends, not to be in the payer system of, a hospital or a SNF or a home healthcare company. So, the consumer comes to the industry, they don't have, in most cases, a lot of experience. And so, how do they find out about, what's the educational process? And I guess the question is too, is what, I think confusion regarding oversight, I think that's a point. I think there's just confusion about, what are my options for taking care of mom? So I think it's broader than some of what's written here, but maybe we can just, I'm not sure this is the time to have a discussion of where, because I think there's a lot more discussion needs to take place on, what we want the industry to look like, but where it's housed. But clearly there's confusion, and how do we think it negatively impacts our industry, and are there things we can do to make this an easier process for people?
So Mark, I'll take a stab at that. Thank you for that overview. And I agree with you that maybe not so necessarily confusion over oversight, but probably the industry in general and the public needing it when they need it and not planning. So I do think that it would be helpful. We at our association have put out a couple of things over the years to try to clarify that. But I know Leah Cantor also has sent out her thoughts on it, to this group, with just some breakdown of, should we just provide some general education somewhere to the public that summarizes every aspect of home and community-based services and where the services can be purchased from. So I think and that wouldn't cost a lot of money. I do think that might be a good recommendation coming out of this task force, to do some public education and have it housed in a variety of places so that people can easily access it. I'm sure, HCAOA gets phone calls, we get phone calls, I need care, what do I do? How do I find it? So we try to give them the resources. But if we have maybe one standard tool that we try to make sure is kept up, because changes happen.
Yeah.
But if we have some kind of tool that we can keep up, it might clarify a lot of the confusion.
Can I just weigh in? And maybe it would be worthwhile just to go through the bolded categories in this document, because towards the end, it talks about public awareness and education strategies, which I think is what consumers were raising as misunderstanding, or not fully understanding what kinds of services are available, what is maybe comparisons among not just services available but quality measures. And I think that's a separate thing than the confusion about the oversight, which and there's obviously another bullet under this, confusion about the industry itself. But confusion about oversight was, okay, so where do we go if there's a problem? If our Homemaker companion agency is not being responsive to what we want, do we go to the Department of Public Health? Because I know that they oversee home health care, and I have a nurse coming in once a week, and I reach out to the Department of Public Health. Oh, this is something different. I think that was what I heard. Now I admittedly probably know the least about this industry and issue than all of you, but I just wanted to weigh in that was kind of what I heard from the public meeting.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I would echo that we did hear that suggestion come up. As a small home care owner, I don't share that quite as much, that we are medical, because most of what we do is, companionship and engagement and, cleaning around the house and so forth. So I do think it should be discussed, and it does sound like there needs to be a way to kind of enforce for the agencies out there. I mean, I was horrified to hear those stories. Oh my gosh, broke my heart to hear them. But there are so many good agencies out there that, maybe there does need to be some level of enforcement at DCP. I don't know what your options are for enforcement, but you enforce a whole lot of, you oversee a whole lot of industries. So maybe there are tools you can have to kind of step up the enforcement side without needing to go over to DPH, which does have that medical, it's all medical there, and it really is so different from the private pay type of services we usually offer.
It looks like Anna and Sheldon had their hands up. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Anna?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the concerns that I heard when it comes to confusion about oversight of the home care industry is that there seems to be amongst the public a uniform expectation for how folks are vetted before they're allowed into a care recipient's home, whatever job title they're operating under, whether they're regulated by DPH or DCP. I think a lot of the issues that people identified during the public hearing and conversations I've had in the past is that whatever job title someone is operating under, they have access to your property, potential access to your finances, access to your physical body. And I think consumers have a fair expectation that the state is providing a similar level of scrutiny and oversight to all of those folks before they're allowed to come into your home, regardless of the task they're going to perform once you're there. Where we're seeing the problems is, whether you're a visiting nurse or a PCA or a homemaker companion, the access that you have to property, to people's bodies is similar across the board. And I think that's a fair expectation, that we would you consider the safety implications of that similarly, regardless of agency or job title.
Thanks. Sheldon, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I agree with the way Ann described it, but it sounded to me that it was even worse in terms of the confusion of which agency is in charge. And my overall impression, I appreciate what Maria just said about, but we're clearly not medical. That these are distinctions that nobody in the public can get right and are never going to get right. And I think from the testimony where people had specific recommendations, pretty much everybody seemed to say they should be in the same agency for the reasons just said, the confusion, the hopeless confusion. Appreciating that if it's not medical, maybe not seeming to be right to be DPH, but the reality is that there's so much overlap. DPH is already regulating everything in sort of, I think, in the general space. And my guess is if we were all, there's a clean slate and there were no such agencies of any kind, and we were imagining creating a system of regulation and oversight and where complaints go, it's hard to imagine we would say, oh yeah, let's put those in two different agencies. So it seems that from the testimony about the stories of people like the person, I forget her name, but who've been waiting for over a year after you filed a complaint with DCP, which is a resource issue, which is a separate thing we need to talk about. It's in the list here. But what she went through before she even figured out it was DCP was such a problem that has to be made much, and public education isn't going to work unless it really is a simplified system. And probably I would end up where people made specific recommendations. They said it should be in one place and it should be a DPH. I would probably agree with that for all those reasons.
Okay. Erin?
Hi. I agree with both what Anna and Sheldon said, but I think what I heard was it's not only about what the expectations are regarding the service provided, but also what are the expectations when you file a complaint? Knowing what the timelines are going to be, that if it's a criminal case, there's other, just having a place where that's outlined, I think would help a great deal. And it seemed to be a recurring theme as to not only did they not know where to go, they didn't know what to expect as far as outcomes. So if that could be defined somewhere, I think that would be really helpful as well.
Okay. Hopefully, we're going to get to that on complaint resolutions, which is next page over. But so Senator Miller, did you have a comment or a question for us? Hi, Senator Miller. Can you hear us okay? Or I know you're traveling today.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think the important thing is to make sure that the consumer, that we make this process easier for the consumer. There is a lot of confusion, and I personally was confused when my father needed service.
Hey, Senator Miller, I think.
Not know where to go. And so I believe that it should be under DPH, only because you're dealing with the elderly and you're dealing with individuals that cannot take care of themselves, that are not capable of taking care of themselves. And it could be a situation where the family has to get an aide to come in. So it would make sense to me that it would be one-stop shopping, where we don't have things going between Consumer Protection and Department of Public Health. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela Brown?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a little bit more to what Anna was saying, where there is an oversight of the companion or the homemaker. DCP, just wanted to reiterate that DCP regulates the agencies and not the workers outside of the criminal background check. And we have disqualifying convictions now as of January 1, 2022. But the regulation that DCP has is with just the HCA agency itself.
Okay. The second bullet I was just looking at, lack of clarity regarding services that can be provided under existing statute, scope of authority. So, yeah, this one, this certainly comes from the industry, I'm confident, as well as maybe even the consumer. I'm trying to think.
Do you want me to say something about it, Mark? Would that be helpful?
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, what I did here, and it was from the industry, but let me back up. I think that a number of people who testified, or some people who testified, we didn't have that many, talked about folks who were providing assistance with activities of daily living.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there was just, and again, maybe I'm the one who's not familiar with the Homemaker companion services, but I thought that those were not services that were provided by Homemaker companions. And I guess the question for this group is, should Homemaker companion agencies, and this was brought forward by an agency, be allowed to provide assistance with activities of daily living, such as are provided by personal care attendants. So I don't know if that makes sense to others, but that was what I thought I heard.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tracy. It is an explicit bullet in the act. Number 5 says services such agencies are authorized to provide. Services such agencies advertise of whether additional limitations are needed on services. Such agencies may advertise. So there's a little bit of a combination of stuff, but I think that, services that the agencies are authorized to provide is an important element of this whole thing. So maybe we'll move that to a separate subheading.
I think it does. I think there is confusion. I guess that was.
Oh, no, there is
part of
confusion.
including it there.
There's clearly confusion. I mean, I don't want to speak for the Department of Consumer Protection, but I know that, their view 2 years ago was different than it is today. I think they've recently acknowledged that, bathing and personal care are, permitted functions or services. I don't know that, but it's not really written that way in the text of the legislation or the law. So I think that, I think in my mind, that is closely tied to training, because I think, and then I think you get to the whole thing of the question around standards, right? And I don't want to use the term licensure because I know that scares people, but if you're going to put this thing under DPH, that's where people want it to go. What are the requirements of that I'm just going to call it a license for lack of a better word, but and I think explicitly you have to address training standards, and you also have to explicitly address permitted services in a lot more detail than they're provided under 400, whatever it is. So that one we probably should move to right under the whole training discussion, because I think they're just closely linked. Does anyone else have a view on that one?
Looks like Tracy does.
Tracy? Yep.
Yeah, Mark, thank you. Pamela may have a lot more to say about this from the DCP perspective, but I'm thinking that it may be more in the reality that the regulations under DCP only define 2 roles, or the homemaker companion. They do not define a PCA, which, when you look at the growth over the past 10 years that DCP presented back at that October 21st meeting, they've had a growth of almost 200% in registrations of agencies. And many of them are responding not just for private duty homemaker companion services, but they're responding to support a tremendous growth in our rebalancing in Connecticut to keep seniors at home. And that PCA waiver is a called out waiver within the DSS waiver programs, but it's not a defined role. Neither is a live-in, a defined role within DCP, but that's where those services are coming from. So I think if we back up, I don't know if we're getting into a big domino effect here, but if we back up, we talked first about, does it belong with DCP? Does it belong with DPH? I think the reality is whoever it belongs to, the regulations don't align with what our current initiatives are in the state to keep people at home, and the programs that we have, the waiver program, state funded, et cetera, that we have to be able to allow that to happen. So I think somehow we've got to figure out, where does it belong and how do we align it? How do we make sure that whatever the regulations are, they match what we're allowed to do and what we want to continue to be able to do into the future? And then we can look at the oversight and all those other pieces. But I think we need to contemporize things first.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. Anyone else have any comments they want to make regarding the services or,
Mark, can you hear me? This is Mike talking.
yes, Mike.
I don't mean to be out of line, and I understand you're going in order, but previous to me receiving all of this information, I wrote down some recommendations before looking at all of this, and I was just wondering if I could, if I'd be allowed just to. There's a lot of what I wrote is actually in this content. So I was just wondering if it'll take me just a couple of minutes if I could voice what I wrote down as far as recommendations go. You could just, because obviously I own a home care agency, and I, like you, and we deal with this each and every day. We're on the ground, and we hear a lot of stuff, not only from inside the industry, but our caregivers. So I was just wondering if you just give me a couple minutes and just to throw this out there. So because there's some other topics that may need to be addressed. So like,
Okay,
probably take me 3 minutes or so.
go ahead.
I wrote down, well, I think first and foremost, a lot of what we're trying to do, it's going to be very difficult if the Department of Consumer Protection, of course, as everyone knows, isn't provided more resources, because they're just not going to be able to monitor like the latest ratio of agencies, supervisors is 903 to 2, and it continues to grow. So I wrote down for the first one, and nobody mentions this, and I know the state is probably 100% against it, but I did write down considering a cap on the number of agencies, because right now, basically the standard in Connecticut is quantity over quality, and obviously it should be reversed. Now I know New York, I believe, is the only state in the country that does cap the amount of agencies that can be open. So that was, another reason why a cap may be essential is because with no cap, the number of agencies continues to grow by leaps and bounds, and we still basically have 2 supervisors. Now, in saying that, perhaps if we could, so well, I'll get back to that in a second. But what happens is, now if the agencies continues to increase and the number of supervisors don't, or the help with in the hiring process of the ombudsman doesn't increase because they only hired 1, which is kind of a slap in the face. This, by so many more agencies opening, it has a very impactful effect on the overall caregiver pool. And the caregiver pool is extremely, the caregiver pool now is spread extremely thin, and it also has a devastating effect on the assisted living and nursing home industry. So I thought that should be a consideration. And 2, if no cap, the registration process has to be more stringent. Like a suggestion would be, once the registration is submitted and approved, there might be a checklist of compliance completed in order for the agency to open. This in itself may refrain potential new agencies from opening. Third, I wrote down personal care services, as you're saying now, and as I read on the screen, personal care services must be addressed and added along with the homemaker and companion services with a provider with clear definition. And many other states do provide and market the use of personal care services. 4, and I've always said this, and I kind of don't understand it because it's common sense. I believe the state needs a title change, because the title homemakers and companions is misleading. I suggest non-medical home care agents, the title of non-medical home care agencies, and the services offered would be homemakers, companions, and personal care. And it's a fact that basically, and I'm sure you would agree, and at our agency, that at least 75% of our home care cases provide personal care, and 80% of our caregivers have a home health aide certificate, but unfortunately, we can't really tell anyone. Fifth, I wrote down training requirements as we were speaking about. As of right now, this is where it's misleading, that title, Homemakers and Companions, they require zero training. Current requirement for HHAs, as you know, is 50 hours classroom, 50 hours clinical, 100 hours total. And I believe this should be a mandate. So this can possibly be added to the statutes under personal care. And agencies may also be required to provide ongoing training, such as courses through Caregiver Academy and throughout the year, and specific courses upon completion must be checked and verified. Another thing that I think that should be really looked into would be to provide ease of confusion, and everything can be addressed here, is an updated, more comprehensive website, just like the senator suggested, one-stop shopping, and kind of an all-inclusive website. And there would be some time, energy, and effort dedicated to it, but I don't think it would be that expensive. I know, I'm sorry to be lengthy, but I'll just go through them real quick. Another one is, obviously, we're going to need a revision of the statutes, possibly edits and expansion. Another one, 8, I'm thinking about this. All home care agencies, as of right now, don't have websites, and that kind of, to me, reduces their legitimacy. And I think every single HCA should be required to have an updated, compliant website. And on each and every website, I also believe that there should be a section of the website where there's a downloadable, the content, an updated one in the future, Connecticut Consumer Guide requirements. So now when who's ever searching for home care can have that information right there in front of them, no matter what website they're going on. Because unfortunately, right now, there's numerous agencies out there that don't have a website, and that's something that I don't understand. And just a few more. The service agreement, I also think, is a huge issue, because my agency was audited a while ago. I had a wonderful meeting with the DCP, and but it was a very, very lengthy process, and a lot of it was dedicated to my service agreement. And I believe this to be a huge issue, because there's no precise place to get the exact wording for a service agreement. So I think just about every service agreement out there doesn't meet up to the standards of the DCP. So I'm thinking maybe there like a model service agreement should be posted somewhere for the public to perhaps absorb, and more importantly, for home care agencies to get a better understanding of how their service agreement should look. And I do have 4 more, but I don't know if you want me to continue, because I'm sorry for taking so much time. Could you hear me?
Yeah, Mark, maybe you're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a few more down that I think are.
I was going to say, we're going to try to cover, everything that was in the 4 pages. So to the extent that they may coincide with one of those topics, you could bring it up then, rather than. I'm just worried if you keep reading. I mean, I've been trying.
I get it. I don't mean to do that. I apologize. I know, but there's so much.
I just want to make sure we can keep track of it. And if you bring it up when it's the topic of choice, it's going to be easier for us to understand and
perhaps
document.
Okay.
And if I may, I think there were some things that are not captured here. So certainly at the end, we want to hear more from everybody if there are things not captured here that we ought to talk about. But certainly, capping the number of agencies, that's not in here anywhere. Mandating that HCAs have websites, that's not anywhere in here. a service agreement model is actually not anywhere in
Right.
here. I think a number of things are in here as we go through it. But those I did write down as not being captured, and we can add them for next time when we're talking more fully about recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So are we down to quality of services? I guess we are. So that first bullet's pretty clear, is that, you know, people have had some poor experiences with agencies. And that is a good summation of the types of things that can go wrong. So I don't know if when we talk about quality services, like in bullet 1 here, though, this becomes more of a complaint resolution topic, or because other than either, you know, standards of service, which I'm sure you would have in any type of regulation, I'm not sure how else you would address this other than through the complaint process.
And I do think that some of the other bullets under this category try to address that with things that folks brought up in terms of more monitoring by the employees by the health by the HCAs.
Right.
That, you know, that there's maybe some more that the state can do with regard to oversight. The background checks were a question. Some other things that came up, but I see some hands up, so maybe people have thoughts.
Chris?
Thanks. I think the quality of service is both about having the process for complaints, and it's also about training. The number of times that I've heard people, and in my own experience, you have someone coming who the agency has said they're trained in, fill in the blank with whatever it is. And the person comes to the home and there's this assumption that they have a certain amount of training because either that's what the agency said or it wasn't talked about at all, but the agency knows what the needs are. And there's a lack of training that happens when some of the companions and caregivers come to the home. So I think it's about both. There needs to be a really clear training plan for whatever the agency is doing and whatever services they're providing that also are made really clear to the consumer.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot in there. You're right to unpack. I mean, you're right. You could put the care plan in there, right? You could put the matching that the agency is supposed to do, caregivers and care plan and needs and all that stuff, oversight, adequate training, complaint resolution. So there's a lot in there. You're right. It kind of, I guess this is the reason we're here, one of them. So, okay. And let's see, Maria.
Hi. So I do think this relates a lot to disclosures, and maybe we need to do more upfront. Maybe we do have a lot of language we have to have in our service contracts, but maybe we need an additional flyer that really clearly stipulates if you have a problem with the services from this agency, here are the places you go, these are the numbers you call. And to the training issue, maybe some of the training does need to be disclosed. You know, for different types of services, I think it's fair to say that the person purchasing these services typically does have a certain degree of expectation that there's a certain amount of training. So maybe that does need to be documented and sort of disclosed more clearly.
Barbara Cass.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And as one of the regulators on the call, I just want to reinforce the value of the regulatory program. Regulations do, and again, I acknowledge that I am a regulator, but I do see the value in regulations and rules that define the rules of engagement that help promote the quality of a service, regardless of what that service is. So I just wanted to reinforce that value as we move forward. We need to look at the regulations that help support the quality of the service delivery. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Maria.
I should put that down. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. Marie?
Hi, thanks. Should I lower my hand? I really think that the quality issues we're seeing here and we heard about are not unique to this industry, and it's not specific to companions and homemakers. We see this in a lot of different industries. There's quality issues, there's concerns that need to be addressed. I think more of what we heard about is when there was an identified concern, where to take it, how it was followed up on. So
Yeah.
Quality of service, I think no matter where you go, right, you can have an issue related to the quality of the service. Not really changing that, but knowing what to do and how to forward that complaint, I think is almost more important than, yes, you have to have the training and those other components, but even if you have that, you may still have issues and concerns. And it's what do you do at that point, even if you've done all that training and outreach and work.
Okay, thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on a few of the comments that were made. I do want to say that training to me is something that is really important, and I know it's difficult in this particular type of DCP registered homemaker companion agency based on the current regulations, as I've said already, because I think the regulations don't match what we do anymore. But if there's some way of us being able to come up with some type of standard training that staff have to go through to understand their role, whether it be communication, patient rights, abuse, neglect, the pieces that some standard training. So that being said, I also like very much what Maria said, because it also goes over on what Mairead said. Having a flyer or something that outlines some key instructions on this is what you do if you need to call and ask a question or complain about a service provided. And then I do want to also say that the process currently for filing a complaint, if I remember correctly, was it has to be in writing. And maybe there can be a way to look at the complaint filing process to make sure that it's done as efficiently as possible, because then on the other end, DCP said that they have a manual complaint investigation process too. I don't think anything it's not tech savvy. So those are things, for tracking purposes, trending, all those things. And I can see that Pamela has her hand raised, so I'm sure she'll clarify, but I thought that was what I heard. So I think it's just that whole process of making sure their consumers know who to call, when to call, how to make their voice heard, and then what the process is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheldon?
So I've been sort of taking notes on what people are saying are ways of getting at the quality issues. And so far, I have not in any particular order that we need regulation. Regulation needs to be updated, as Tracy said. We need to have a robust complaint process. We need to educate about that robust process. We need to have training. I heard somebody say disclosure about training. I want to talk about that in a moment. I did not hear anybody mention what is in the testimony from a couple people, which is the community ombudsman as an important additional thing. So, I mean, maybe there's others, but I think that was sort of the universe of what was being talked about, either just now or in the testimony. The one I wanted to really focus on was this thing about training and the word was disclosure, required disclosure. The testimony is sort of the opposite. It's not that they don't want to disclose. They want to disclose. They want to advertise that we have this training. And the particular example I bring to your attention because of this, the other group that's working on this, some of us are on the Alzheimer's disease sort of coalition work. And there seems to be a recognition that you really need to have training with individuals who have dementia, and that would be really, really valuable. And then the provider agencies are saying, okay, and I know there's testimony from Mag Morelli on this, is yes, there should be training on those things, but we should then be able to say that. We should be able to say we have, if it's true, of course, it has to be real. Just pretending is not going to be the answer. It has to be real and monitored to make sure the training is really happening. But if it's really happening, they want to and reasonably want to be able to advertise that they're doing that. And it also serves a public service, whereas right now they're not allowed to. So under the category of training and then information about training, I would say it's not just disclosure, it's about advertising and what we're going to allow. The one last thing, though, about all of this that I know some of you have complained about before is resources. So, for example, there's only one community ombudsman, which is ridiculous. That's totally unacceptable. You need more. Well, that's resources. Obviously, DCP, let's be honest, right now is drowning with the 900 agencies. They can't, there's no way they can do it with 2 people. They need more resources. Now, if it's going to be moved to DPH, as several people have suggested in the testimony, and maybe we're going there, then you not only have to, add on the number of people being moved, but you have to really fix the problem of lack of resources. So all of this, and if there's going to be training, you have to monitor and supervise the training, right? So that takes even more resources from somebody at DCP or DPH. I think we're going to have to really grapple with that and be very, very specific about the resources needed to do all of this. Thank you.
Mark, do you mind if I just weigh in response to Sheldon briefly?
Sure. Go right ahead.
So, and I just did want to, kind of ground people back to, the document and the process we're walking through, that it does mention in the section that we're on currently on quality. It does talk about the community ombudsman person and not having sufficient staff, and that should be increased. And then under both the training and the advertising memory care, the memory care issues are highlighted and reviewed and talked about. So I just wanted to it's interesting because a lot of these issues are so overlapping and integrated with one another. So even though we're just kind of walking through this and just on the quality section, yes, of course, training and advertising do play into that as well. And so I just wanted to remind people that the document was an attempt to kind of break it up into the categories that the legislation asked us to look at, and some of these issues are going to be kind of later on in the document. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I see Tracy is saying she agrees with what Sheldon just talked about too. Thanks.
Pamela, thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted to just explain or clarify the complaint filing process. So yes, complaints have to be in writing, but we do have an online platform. So anyone can file an online complaint, and also they can email a complaint in. Once a account is established, meaning a complainant can go in and set up their own account, they will receive an alert every time there is new activity on their case. So if a communication has occurred, we update our case, and an automatic email goes to the complainant's email address. So it is very technologically savvy and updated. Most of our work is, I would say about 95% of the work is all electronic. We do have to allow for people who don't have access to computers or don't use computers to send mail in, but we do have an online complaint system.
Thank you. Marie?
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to respond to Sheldon, and I agree that there will be a role in this for the community ombudsman in supporting someone's right to figure out the process and knowing what the process is, and helping them understand their rights to care and services and what the individuals should be providing. But I do feel that we have to have a good accountability relating to where those complaints go and what that process looks like if those complaints are filed, and the follow-up on it. So yes, and I agree that we need more individuals in that role, but how do we do that? And then if they get those concerns and complaints related to individuals' rights, how do we move those forward in an appropriate way?
Christy?
Hi, thank you. And thank you for all of your comments. And I want to go back to something I heard earlier around managing, consumers' expectations up front. And I do think that there needs to be clear communication with family members who are looking for those services on where they need to go if there is a problem. But, moving back to the training, if the training is quantified and documented, it provides the agency to be able to share that their caregivers can do this type of care, and they're trained in things like communication and behaviors and some other things that will be helpful with people who have challenging behaviors. But it also will allow people who call our helpline and they see all of these agencies that are online and the confusion in terms of, will my mom be able to get care from a caregiver who's been trained? I think any way we can streamline the process, I think will be very helpful from both the agency perspective in terms of where complaints are going and/or clear communication for people that are looking for those services.
Thank you. So bullet 2 is lack of monitoring. So that's oversight, kind of care plan specific stuff. All important. Then the next bullet, which we briefly touched on, is the ombudsman and funding for that. We talked a little bit about that. And then background checks is the next bullet. As Pamela has mentioned, there was a new law that became effective January 1, which is very comprehensive. And is required and is in statute. So if people aren't doing it, they are breaking the law. And then that last bullet, again, I'm going to throw into the pot of oversight, care management. That would be something to consider in, what is in a revision of, I guess, the regulations. It's not training related. It's more, these are other things that need to be done in addition to training to effectively run an agency. And that takes us to complaint resolution.
Did Pam, it looks like Pam has her hand up. I don't know if that's about.
Oh, Pam, if you want to add something.
Yes. Going up a little further up on your bullet point about the one more up, for lack of supervision. Okay, so it says the first bullet points, HCA should be required to meet with their homemaker and companions in person. That is currently required by statute under 20-670 subsection 5B. It is requirement that they meet with the person either in person or a virtual meeting for an interview prior to hiring. So that does already exist. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're down to complaint resolution. System needs to provide for an immediate response and resolution of the complaint. Clients are waiting a long time for resolution. We all have commented on lack of resources. DCP does not exercise permissive authority to revoke certification, so there has been some testimony about consumers' views that DCP should have acted a certain way and they chose not to, so that's another issue. I don't know how you could take judgment out of that process, but I'm all ears. When it says language should be, I mean, I guess there's obviously certain infractions you could just say would revoke an HCA license. Revocation, again, should be mandatory under certain circumstances. Very few clients recognize DCP as a department. This kind of goes back to, I think, one of the first topics we were talking about. DSS plays a significant role in credentialing providers for Medicaid waivers, which adds to confusion and perceived authority to seek resolution. How to file a complaint should be part of every HCA contract. Okay. Mike had talked about service agreements, which are this one and the same. So we'll note that for that topic. Complexity can be overwhelming and many victims are embarrassed to come forward. Direct pathway to resolve issues should be established. Guidelines available. So this seems like it's another informational bullet. Complaints should go to protective services for elderly. I mean, we're all mandatory reporters, so. I think we already are mandatory reporters. Okay, so does anyone have specific thoughts about that when they go through what was? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion. I know a lot of the public hearing dealt with this. Is there more clarification that's needed? Does anybody have a strong opinion either way about some of the points that have been brought up? You know, what do people think about this one? Maria?
So I would just say, as a small agency owner, those complaints were horrifying. And I do think there needs to be some maybe more firmer or written or stipulated guidelines to address some of these repeat offenders, because we did see the same name pop up a few times in that testimony. And so maybe, you know, with more resources, DCP could have them, or whatever organization oversees us could have a very more documented and formalized process and some tracking for multiple complaints against one agency, and certainly should have the ability to, you know, eventually, if needed, somehow penalize or stop the, you know, the people who are breaking the law, because it protects the rest of us who do follow the law when we know that these repeat offenders aren't going to be able to continue, you know, what the way that they're treating consumers and, you know, in some cases, clearly abusing the seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? I mean, this one this is a little bit self-explanatory. And I also think that the eventual recommendation has to closely tie in with some of the other things we're talking about. The next topic being probably number one there, training. Okay, so we've heard a lot about a lack of training, right? There is no training requirement. And I think just I want to cover one item that Tracy Wodach had spoken about that some of you may not be as close to as others of us, but so a great deal of Homemaker companion services in the state of Connecticut are provided through DSS, right? I'm going to say it's at least 50%. Probably good. So let's just say half is provided through DSS. Okay. So in order to provide services, HCA services for DSS, under these Medicaid programs, you have to be an HCA. So you have to go get registered with the Department of Consumer Protections. Now, under these programs, they have I'm not sure if it's a service category, Tracy, or just a terminology, but they have what is called a personal care attendant, a PCA, okay? And this PCA is allowed to do personal care. And I'm not so sure how far they get into things like med reminders, and Tracy, maybe you can help me with some of that stuff. But anyways, they do certain services that I believe DCP would tell you a normal HCA cannot do. So that training exists. I've heard some questions about the quality of it, but that's maybe something we can talk about under this subject heading. But clearly, there are some, there's a classification of training, and so you can't say PCA. I can't, as a private pay home care agency, say that I have personal care attendants working for me. I can only say that if I'm providing Medicare services, and they can't do some of the services that they're allowed to provide under Medicaid. So I just wanted to throw that out there as we talk about some of these training requirements. But and some people talked about in the last meeting, that was another meeting I was in, but CNAs and some of these other nomenclatures that are used in other parts of home care and or facilities-based senior care. So basically today in the state of Connecticut, under an HCA registration, I could yank somebody off the bus and do the background check and put them to work without any prior experience or training. And I think that's the rub here. I think that's what we're all getting at with the points that have been made is, this is kind of crazy that, and this was talked about early on by some of the early people who spoke on bullet one, saying, hey, there's kind of a minimum level of expectation that the state has done something when you're going to allow a caregiver into a home, that that not only have they been vetted and background checked, but that there's some oversight into ensuring that they can provide the services that they've been hired to do. So there's all the sub bullets. The state should provide a uniform HCA training program. But memory care, we've talked about memory care again. Training for memory care, that is, you can get training for memory care by the Alzheimer's Association currently, but again, you can't under current law talk about it. You can't say that you have, dementia certified people on your staff. Nope. That's not allowed because that's a medical term. So we've all heard about that whole dance between medical and advertising and non-medical. And so memory care is another one that falls under training. So I think, that just is a summary, just kind of trying to hit all the key points as I read through this. This for me is the number one item on the list, just personally. It all starts with the quality of the people you hire. So all this other stuff becomes less relevant if I'm a great caregiver to someone's home. So if and I think that we need to work in an industry where there are some requirements around that, personally. But I'm going to open it up to hear what everybody else has to say about this.
Mark, if I may, this is Jen Cavallero with the Department of Social Services, and I'm in Community Options. So I think there is some misinformation out there in terms of training, though I certainly, do agree with some of the points that were made. So if a personal care, an agency is employing personal care assistants, there is a training program that the Department of Social Services did put together that individuals are required to complete and be signed off on in terms of providing that level of care in terms of activities of daily living. However, obviously there's question because, right, these are homemaker and companion agencies, which is supposed to be a non-medical care, but these personal care assistants are providing, help with transferring and, getting dressed and taking a shower. And often if the agency does not, employ a nurse, I think there is not a match between, when you look at a home health agency model, versus this homemaker companion agency piece. So that's one piece. The other piece is the credentialing process that, they do go through before becoming a waiver provider, which is done with the fiscal intermediary. So there is a whole checklist that has to be included. There are some training components as well. Not indicating that, any are, where they should be at. I'm just simply stating what's currently in place and what's required of the homemaker companion agencies, but of, over 900 providers, right? There's a wide variety of who's providing what type of service and the ability to have, consistency across the board, because they are going in and providing care to, our most vulnerable residents. And so having, some sort of, obviously, regulation and checks and balances in place that all providers are held to the same standard when if you're going to offer personal care attendant services.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do you think you could provide us with what the training requirements are to become a PCA? Like,
yes, I can.
Tracy sent that in the chat. Tracy sent something in the chat.
It is available right on our website, and I'm not sure I don't know what Tracy posted in the chat, but
yes, I did. I put the link in that goes straight to the PCA training that's currently on file on the website for DSS.
Super. We should look at that before the next meeting.
Yes, and I can, and I'm also happy to share what the credentialing requirements look like also for providers before they are enrolled as a waiver provider. It doesn't mean that they're obviously, this is just speaking to those that are enrolled as providers for, DSS programs. It has obviously is not tied to any of those that are not engaged in the DSS programs.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Tracy?
Yes, I just want to add to what Jen said. So I did put the link in the chat box for the current PCA training that those that do take on waiver program clients on their HCA have to have their PCAs go through this training. So it may be something to look at, but again, a PCA is not recognized under the current regulations. So that's the semantic piece of it. We do have to review that. The other semantic part of it that I just think, I don't know if we need to really delve into this a little bit more, but personal care, assistance with a transfer is not necessarily medical care. When you're trying to help somebody in their home, I mean, this is my interpretation. You may all have different interpretations, is my point. It's subjective. Memory care for somebody that you're just supporting them through a communication. I help my mother-in-law, and I try to help all of her children and grandchildren understand how to communicate with her. It's not a medical model. It's helping them have more tools in their toolbox to be able to communicate better to her and with her. So I think we need to really look at this and the importance of the growth of aging population in the community and what kinds of things they do need. And they're not necessarily medical model, they're social model still. They're keeping people in the home where they want to be. So I do think we need to have training. Think we need to have training for both of those bullets that are in there. But we need to figure out how we can work within the regulations, or maybe put some legislation in place that maybe updates the regulations so this all can be allowed.
Thank you. I think that's very accurate. Lou Reed?
Thanks. To Tracy's point, I think she brought up a lot of good points there. One of my concerns is we have the same language in different areas, right? So you have the self-directed PCAs, you have agency-based PCAs. There's different rules, different programs use them in different ways. And I think that causes some of the confusion. So if you're going to put out guidance, either making sure you know which one it's under or how it might impact a different group or different individuals using other services that are named the same way that might not be under an agency. And I think that's where we run into some confusion. It's hard for us to even know, and we work within the system. I would imagine that for individuals trying to receive services or engage services for a loved one, that would also be confusing and what those expectations could be. So maybe we need to do some work around that as a base first, to Tracy's point, and then build off of that.
Chris, did you want to go?
Thank you. Mark, I think you bring up some really good points earlier about the degree of background checks and hiring practices, and hiring high quality people is going to make a fundamental difference to start with. And then to get at the training piece, there's so much here in terms of, labels and names and what people can do and what people can't do, that links back to the education and having some really clear descriptions for what each type of job does, or each person does. The other thing I'm thinking about as I'm listening to this, and I think somebody touched on it before, was communication skills. And yes, that's connected with Alzheimer's and dementia, and having some background information about what dementia is and what are effective strategies for communication. It's also just general communication skills. Once you have good people in place, what are their communication skills? How do they interact with both the clients and the family members of the clients who are often hiring the agencies? Because there can be a gap there too. And I think training can be something that really helps with that, because communication is a set of skills and those can be learned as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheldon?
So I actually have a question for some of the previous speakers here. I know that the charge is Homemaker Companion, not PCAs, and we just heard a little bit of a summary of that. But I have a question, because I think it's somewhat analogous in terms of how things will work here. The PCAs that are working for an agency and that are funded by Medicaid through a waiver, are they also regulated by DPH? Do PCAs sometimes, I guess, get regulated by DPH? So I'm just sort of asking what the deal is now. And
No.
all the answer is no.
No, they would be regulated by DSS and DCP, not DPH, though.
You're saying a PCA? No, but I thought PCA.
A PCA is under a DSS waiver program.
Right, but you said DCP. I thought they
The DCP, yeah, all HCAs. So, okay.
I didn't say
order-
HCA. I said PCA. PCA working.
Right, but the PCA works for an HCA. So I can't provide Medicaid waiver services as an HCA hiring PCAs unless I am registered with DCP. Right, because they give me my HCA credentials.
But I thought PCAs are also employed by agencies. Tracy will know this for sure. Are employed by agencies that at least are regulated by DPH. Is that not correct?
That's incorrect.
Well,
They would not have that title.
they wouldn't have that title, but they may be participating in the PCA waiver program. They would have the title under the licensure of DPH as a home health aide.
As a home health aide is the answer. They would be called a home health aide.
It's
Okay.
more frequent, though, what Mark is saying, that's the most frequent model, that it's under the agency-based PCA model is under the Homemaker Companion Agency. The self-directed PCA is obviously self-directed by the employer getting the care. That's the most common model.
Okay, so my question, thanks both of you for clarifying that. I guess my question was, how does it work then in a situation, putting aside the label, where somebody is a provider that DSS regulates, as discussed, but DPH also regulates at least the employer, right? As you described, Tracy. Does that work reasonably well? Does it work reasonably well having both of those agencies involved in some way supervising that service? Because my point is, if that does work reasonably well, then that could be what we have here as well for the, I'll just say, non-hands-on. I know there's a problem with that, a non-hands-on, HCA service provider.
So I think, Sheldon, we're getting a little off track in the sense that so the whole task force is to talk about HCAs, Home Care Association. And if you bring up the self-directed program, you're outside the remit of an HCA.
Right, but what I was trying to say is that it's sort of like it can be analogous that there might be some services here which are funded by DSS, because that's what I heard some of them are, but also DPH regulates. That's all I was trying to say, and that is, I thought, what we're talking about, among other things, is which big agency should be responsible for regulating.
I don't know if you want me to answer anything there, Mark. I can
Well, yeah, I mean,
add to that.
I think that Sheldon was kind of addressing it. So go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
So if it's provided under a DPH licensed agency where they're getting a home health aide for the services, it requires an RN oversight, becomes somewhat of a medical model, and it's not affordable. So it's really not done often at all. It's primarily the PCA waiver is primarily managed by the Homemaker Companion Agencies.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more thoughts on this training subheading?
I think Anne has her hand up.
Thanks. I was
Oh,
trying
yeah,
not to
yeah,
break in as I did
Great.
previously. So yeah, and I don't even know if this is on training, but it's I think it's related to what Sheldon was raising, and previously when Tracy said that assistance with activities of daily living is not a medical model. I'm just wondering if DPH agrees with that. And it seems to me like DCP has been thinking that it is, and it's kind of been separated out from, you know, the HCAs, what the HCAs are doing. So maybe it's my own misunderstanding, but I would just be kind of interested in what the state agencies are thinking in that regard. And I know Mike has his hand up too, so maybe he's going to respond. But I'm just wondering if everybody is in agreement that assistance with activities of daily living is not a medical model and should not be a medical model, and what the thoughts are.
I'm not sure that I said all personal care services are not under a medical model. What I meant to say is not all memory care, not all personal care is a medical model. When you're looking at trying to keep people in their homes, if they don't have significant medical issues going on where they need the oversight of an RN or a therapist to ensure that the care is provided properly, then to me, that is not a medical model. That's a social model, and personal care should be able to be provided, which falls under activities of daily living. That's what I meant to say. So I hope I wasn't confusing.
And Jen put a nice little thing in the chat too. I think that calls it out a little bit. But it is sticky and hard.
I think to your point though, Anne, perhaps that's something that we need to define. Is what constitutes a medical model?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to get at.
I agree with Barbara because, Pam just put in the DCP consumer guide, HCA guide, which is something that was distributed to the HCAs, I think in March of this year. And that does, it draws the line in that advertising piece, what they can and can't advertise. So and that is precisely one of the things that we're concerned about through the task force is, are their hands tied because they're not allowed to do this, when maybe we need to really look at what they can and can't do, and what Barbara just said about defining as medical versus social.
Yeah, that may be the root of the task here, is to define those services so that we are covering everything that we consider to be a non-medical model. And then marry the training and oversight and regulation and all those things to that. So maybe you just start with the services. Because, and again, this is speaking broadly, but by definition, DPH does not consider the activities of daily living to be a medical model because they don't regulate it. Even the one licensure that's available which is kind of like a home health aid agency license, which no one is currently licensed under, because what it is it's a model for delivering, it's nursing directed care delivered through a home health aid, but it's nursing directed care. And we would never be talking about nursing care under the non-medical model, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mike? Hey, Mike, can you hear me? I think you got your mute button on still.
Okay. I'm okay now?
Yes,
Can you
sir.
hear me? Okay. I agree that it's the most critical topic of all, and I can't, you talk about public awareness, and I'll bet you the majority of the public doesn't realize that our caregivers don't need to be trained, and I can't imagine the reaction if they knew that, just sending in really anyone to provide care for the loved one, because each and every case must be individually addressed with levels of acuity because they vary. So you simply can't send a homemaker companion to care for a person whose acuity is high. So of course, Mark, you know as well as I do, after doing an assessment and phone calls, so on and so forth, that you figure out what the client needs specifically. We're going to assign a home health aide, preferably with experience, because that's what the family's going to want, not a home care companion with absolutely zero training. And like I said before, I wanted to know exactly what my caregivers go through day in and day out. And I personally went to Valley Medical School in Bridgeport, and I did receive my certification. And I went through the 100 hours of training, 50 hours of classroom, 50 hours of clinical at Lord Chamberlain. And there, you know, just addressing two specific topics alone, like transferring when bathing and memory care, it's medical in a non-medical way. And the textbook, and I have it right by me because I sometimes glance through it. The textbook alone at these home health aid trainings is 812 pages, believe it or not. It's maybe it doesn't need to be that in depth, but they really go through everything from A to Z. So I just wanted to add that, where it goes literally from zero training, and then you go to take 100 hours of training, and textbooks 812 pages. So you know something has to be rectified. Thanks.
Thank you. Anna?
Thanks. I think, with this training piece, for me, this really goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of uniformity and oversight and adequate resources to regulate. Like, even regardless of where we land with medical model, non-medical model, what is our standard for the training? Are we talking about a uniform across the board training that, is hands-on and ongoing and measured, or are we going to let agencies say, yes, we've trained when they've, had their staff watch YouTube videos? Like, I think there's just such a difference there. And if we're seeing oversight and regulatory issues on, other really fundamental concerns, if we add a training component to this without additional resources, does the training just become one more thing where consumers can't have sort of a baseline expectation of what training means? I can rephrase that if I need to, but I think if we don't have the oversight to ensure that training means one thing across 900 different agencies, I think that's more confusing ultimately for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I think we are talking about a consistency of training. And I mean, I think we have to almost operate apart from the cost side of things. You know, we can't assume that we're not going to be able to get funding. I think what we have to do is do what we think is right and make assumptions that becomes other people's business to get the funding for what we're doing. So I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could have training that isn't measured, auditable, certifiable, you know, credentialed, all those things. So
Yeah, I think we just need to be really, really clear in, how we state that, and kind of carrot and stick, like what and what happens then if people are not attaining a certain standard. And I think the more we can articulate what the oversight response is, the more meaning there's going to be in having a training piece.
Mike, did you still have your
Oh,
hand
no,
up?
I'm sorry.
Okay, Sheldon?
Yeah, I'm really apologizing for being dense here, and I don't want to take up more time than maybe a minute, but I'm still totally confused by the statement that DPH doesn't regulate activities of daily living service, because, for example, don't home health agencies employ home health aides as distinguished from PCAs? And what they're doing is entirely just activities of daily living. And aren't they regulated by DPH?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
oops, sorry.
go ahead. No, you go, Barbara. You're
So
much more
I think
qualified.
it's hard to paint with a very broad brush. That the mere fact that someone needs supports with activities of daily living or IADLs is not a defining marker that puts it over into a medical model, but it's looking at the individual and all of their needs, the totality of that individual's assessed needs. But to your point with home health and home health agencies, and we can go on and say Homemaker, home health, Homemaker companion agencies, the defining markers there are nursing +1. So in a home health agency, it would be nursing services that would be provided +1 other service. So it could be home health aid services. It could be an allied health service, such as physical therapy or occupational therapy, or medical social work. So to paint with a broad brush and say that ADLs, if the individual is only receiving ADLs, is not the end all and be all that makes it a social model, but it's a framework to start to work with. So that's where I would propose again that perhaps medical model needs to be defined somewhere. And what constitutes, where's that threshold for a medical model? And I know that's kind of like a government bureaucratic answer that's a little even more complicated than the situation we're talking about. So probably not helpful, Sheldon.
Well, I don't want to take up every time more on it, but some of these things really matter because, if we're confused.
But Sheldon, I think the clearest marker we can delineate at this moment is nursing services. If it's nursing,
Yes.
So when you talk about, isn't a home health aide going to provide me with the shower and all that stuff? Yes, but only if you have the need for nursing services. You can't call up, I can't call up a home health agency and say, hey, my mom needs a shower and food, and she's a fall risk, and she needs help with ambulation. Oh, and by the way, she has memory issues. Can you send me a home health aide for 8 hours a day and I can charge it through Medicare? That's not an option. That answer is no.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay? So you have to have a need for nursing, and as Barbara was saying, nursing +1. So if I have PT, if I have OT, right? If I have nursing services, if I have a colostomy bag, if I have a catheter that needs to be changed, those are nursing services That's home health. That's medical model. Okay. These other things which don't require nursing services, but aren't permitted a lot currently under current legislation, which are activities of daily living. Activities of daily living is everything from the time grandma gets up to when she goes to bed. That's, can she ambulate? Can she transfer? Can she dress herself? What's her cognitive condition? Does she need assistance in and out of a shower? Does she need assistance? Does she need a Hoyer lift? Does she transfer on her own? Can she make her own meals? Can she eat? Do I have to take her somewhere? Do I do her laundry? Do I do her, get her food for dinner, make her meals? All those, that's what we're talking about. These are non-medical activities of daily living for seniors that seniors need to live and remain in their home. And that's what we're trying to define as. So what the HCAs who are out there in this state doing the work every day would tell you is that's what we do. Okay. And if you looked at the regulations under DCP would tell you, well, I don't know about ambulation and transfers, and certainly not Hoyer lifts and all those other things, right? So that's what we're trying to, one of the, I talked about this earlier, but I think what we need to start with is the scope of services that are required or being demanded by the senior population to keep them at home. And once we bump up against nursing, we have to say, no, bridge too far. But we have to define everything up to that bridge. And that's going to be what Mike Savoy refers to as non-medical, right? So nowhere else in the United States are HCAs referred to as homemaker companions. Nowhere, no other state. You can't find another state in the country that's going to tell you you're a homemaker companion. The nomenclature is your medical home care or your non-medical home care. That's what the industry refers to you as. And so what we're here to do really is come up with what do we want this non-medical industry to look like? And as I've said earlier, I think you start with services, and then you go to training, and then you go to oversight, and then you go to complaints and monitoring and all those things. But anyways, Barbara?
The only thing that I would add to that, Mark, is that, and perhaps just to augment your comments, is in our homemaker, home health aid agencies, and there's that word homemaker in there. What makes it different than the home care companion agencies with DCP is that in that instance with DPH, there's still an RN that is overseeing the plan of care with that homemaker. So while we have the homemaker, home health aid agency set of regulations, it still does describe a registered nurse who's involved in that plan of care. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Okay. We're down to our last 15 minutes, so we might as well go on to the public awareness. I think unless people want to, I think this is the first comment I was making on public awareness and education, and I think we've had some good discussion about it.
Mark, I think Maria has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Maria.
Thanks, and I'll be super quick, but as we talk about training, I would just bear in mind that different seniors need different kind of levels of homemaker companion assistance, and that we might want to try to tie different training recommendations to the types of services provided, so that if it's strictly companionship, it's a certain level, and then if you're going to a little higher level of homemaker type services, that it might be a different level of training. And then there's so much talk about personal care that of course that would be, an even higher level. Thanks.
Sure. Kim, if we go just to the last page. So advertising, I mean, the biggest thing here, I'm not quite sure what Senate Bill 267 was, but oh, is that the one was that the one that was submitted by DCP that didn't go anywhere? Not really 100% sure, but there's the biggest, well, I'm not going to say the biggest, there's a very large disagreement between the industry and DCP about memory care and what can or can't be advertised related to memory care. And so memory care, again, Alzheimer's is a disease, okay? And therefore, it is the opinion of the Department of Consumer Protection that any care related to a disease is medical in nature. And so therefore, HCAs should not be talking about providing Alzheimer's care. So the reality of the situation is 99% of Alzheimer's care is non-medical in nature. It is behavioral, it is redirecting, it is knowing how to work with seniors from a communication standpoint, right? And those are skills that you can teach caregivers. Those are skills that caregivers can learn on the job. And those are skills that caregivers can be taught through the Alzheimer's Association. So there are all these existing avenues for people to learn these skills in dealing with seniors. So, but we then can't say that we have any kind of Alzheimer's and dementia experience because it has been determined by DCP that that's medical. So, and our concern, and this is getting back to the medical, non-medical model, is, and as I was mentioning to Sheldon, like when you say, hey, Sheldon, when you call up to the home health company and you say, my mom has Alzheimer's and I need you to come over and get her out of bed and give her a shower and feed her, they're going to say, well, we don't do that. There's no nursing care in there. So no, I'm sorry, we don't do that. And then what our concern is in the industry is if we can't say that in our websites, the consumer gets lost real fast. I mean, you think the consumer's confused now? What happens to the consumer when you don't have any? If you type in, Alzheimer's care and there's nowhere to go in the state of Connecticut, you got a problem. So that's the industry's concern. And our voice was heard in the legislature last year, and this proposed bill was not passed. It was pulled. We will continue to fight that tooth and nail to the extent it comes up again. But hopefully that's going to be something that the task force deals with right now is, as when we come up with this whole list of services and training and registration or licensure, whatever it is, that we deal with this up front in our recommendations, that we have some solid recommendations on what people can say and what training they can get and what training they can advertise. If they're not psychiatrists. So that's, in my mind, that's the biggest thing that's in here.
It looks like maybe
Yeah.
Pam has her.
Pam, did you?
Yes, and just to clarify, and I agree that this needs clarification. The concern is that you're offering dementia care, and it's actually what you're really offering are services, okay? And behavioral health is a license by a mental health provider, someone who's gone to school, sat for an exam, has the education. And so we just want to make sure that it is clear to the consumer that they're not getting someone who has, all these skills and training and licenses. So that's the clarification that is needed there. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Tracy?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I just, Christy Koval and I and Sheldon, all three of us are on the ADRD, Alzheimer's disease related dementia coalition, looking at statewide strategies to improve care awareness, education, training, all the pieces for consumers and providers, and educational programs, building providers of tomorrow. And one of the things that has come up more and more is the reality of the growth of home and community-based service needs and people wanting to be in their home. And just what Mark was saying about, it's not necessarily that you're giving medical care to those with memory loss or ADRD as we are using it in the coalition, but there's a strong feeling and recommendation and support on that coalition that there be some level of training so that we can support people successfully in the home. And it's not necessarily, as I had mentioned before, kind of a medical approach. So those are things that somehow we've got to figure that out. I know currently the way it's written, currently DCP's hands are tied, and I understand that. But we've got to figure it out, because otherwise we're doing a disservice to the consumers in the community and to the providers of the care of those services.
Thank you. Anna?
It seems like this is something that could almost be handled under kind of a uniformity and oversight and training piece. If there's one set curriculum that people could take, that consumers know what it is. Everybody knows how to provide it, knows how to access it. So then there's not this additional complicated conversation around, did you train in care or services? Did you, what, it would just be one thing that we could say, this provider has trained their staff in this manner. Maybe it's a publicly available curriculum. Maybe it's, it takes time to build a public understanding around, what a particular certification or one particular training means. But I think if you can have uniformity around exactly how someone has been trained, that can be easily understood by consumers and by regulators, that's how we know whether we're hitting the mark or not. Otherwise, it just breeds more questions and more conversation. And I think that's the opposite of, I don't think that's what we need in this space.
Agreed. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for their contributions today. This has been a great discussion. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think, hey, Cameron, are you still around? Do you know when our next scheduled meeting is?
Our next scheduled meeting is on December 2nd at noon.
December, so 2 weeks.
Yes.
Cool. So what I will promise to do, along with my co-chair, is to reorganize this a little bit. I think a lot of the discussion is really kind of, made me painfully aware that, some of this stuff might be better classified under a certain heading. So anyways, just organizationally, I'll try to reclassify it. I'll try to add, we'll try to add all the comments that we got that are we think are relevant and meaningful, and we'll try to take out stuff that or just minimize stuff that's less important, right? Does that sound right, Ann?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think that's a good approach.
Mark, it looks like Senator Miller has her hand up.
Senator Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk to you about the last recommendation. Are you going to discuss that?
Let's see, the last one. Is that the ban on the approval of?
Yes.
So I could give a quick overview if you would like.
Well, no, I know what it is. I'm wondering why is that? Why would you want to consider that as part of the task force team?
Can I just note, because I put it on there, Senator Miller, and I did think it was kind of outside the scope of what we were tasked to do, and I think maybe not where we want to go, but we were trying to be true to what was raised in the public hearing, and there was one Homemaker companion agency that raised that as a recommendation. So it was kind of put on there at the end as like, additional recommendations. It doesn't necessarily fall under what we were charged to do, but just in the spirit of not ignoring it. But I think we would love to hear what your thoughts are about it.
Thank you. So, and I appreciate you trying to address the issues heard at the public hearing. I'm strongly recommending that the task force, do not consider this as a recommendation, as something to review. The intention of the legislative intent of the task force is to ensure the quality of services to the consumer. This is a very controversial issue, and I know the industry has come to the aging committee. It came out, I believe it came out of Human Services, and I don't feel comfortable with even considering repealing a bill or legislation that came out of another committee. I think if the industry wants that to repeal it or to revisit it, I think that it needs to go through. They need to try another avenue, whether there's a task force to revisit it, or they talk to the Human Services chair to revisit it. But I don't think that this is the task force is the avenue to take or the route to take in revisiting this issue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Miller.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Senator.
All right, so we will regroup in a couple weeks, and we'll, at least a couple days before the meeting, we'll send out the agenda and the revision of this, and try to add, we'll see. We'll also, Mike, I know you made comments and some of them weren't on here, like the care plan, the service agreement, things like that. So we'll try to also take into account as many of those additional comments that were raised that may have some relevance in one of these subheadings. So everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.